Mike, we're continuing our What I Love About Comics video series that will be going throughout the year. What's another thing you love about comics?
Well, I'm mainly a story guy, so I'm really attracted to the writers because they're the ones that tell the stories. Now, don't get me wrong, I love certain artists. I mean, how can you not love Perez or Sienkiewicz or Simonson or Alex Ross, who, by the way, his show will be starting up next Saturday, if I remember correctly, at the Shenandoah Valley Museum. We'll be there the Saturday after. But anyway, writers. Love writers when they're really good. And there are certain people that just consistently blow my mind away with how entertaining their stories are. Like, for instance, Peter David. Okay, what's Peter David done? Okay, yeah, everyone knows now him. He's the guy that's writing Spider-Man 2099. Yeah, that's nice. He's written every solo issue of Spider-Man 2099 since the character's first appearance in 1992, except for 2 issues. Miguel O'Hara is his character, and really, he's the only guy that's written them. That shows a huge amount of dedication. And it's not just Spider-Man 2099. Peter David's a huge fan of Star Trek, and he wrote a large chunk of the DC Star Trek run. Aquaman. Okay, right now, a lot of people are saying Aquaman's cool. Before Jeff Johns did it, a lot of people thought Aquaman was a joke. That's because they never read Peter David's Aquaman. You might remember Aquaman running around with a harpoon instead of a hand. Where he lost the hand was early on in Peter David's run. Issue 2, as a matter of fact. And that was the start of a 50-plus issue run, if you want to count the Atlantis Chronicles 7-issue miniseries that gave the background on Atlantis. But, Aquaman was a badass through the whole thing. How'd he lose his hand? Oh, it's easy. He fought someone who had the same telepathic powers to command fish that he did. Unfortunately, it happened to occur near the Amazon, where there's piranhas. Hand gets pushed back. This guy's turning around and telling the fish to eat Aquaman. Aquaman's saying no. They're going to go with what they naturally want. Bye-bye hand. Aquaman still beats him. That's badass. Peter David got his start in Spectacular Spider-Man. He was actually working for Marvel in the marketing department, actually going around to comic stores and trying to convince them to get cash registers, because at the time a lot of comic stores didn't have things like that. A lot of stores were just using like tackle boxes. So Marvel had a cash register program, but he really wanted to write. He got Spectacular Spider-Man because they couldn't find anyone to write it. And so yeah, okay, we'll give you a shot. He wrote Spectacular Spider-Man for, about 30 issues, including the classic Sin Eater Death of Jean DeWolf story. Then from there, he was done. They couldn't get a job for a while. Till he got to Incredible Hulk. Now, let me give you a little bit of example of how bad Hulk was. John Byrne had just done a short run on Hulk. He got tired of it and gave up. The editor was asking everyone and getting turned down. There was no writer working for Marvel or DC that would write Hulk. The only reason it was still coming out was because the current editor had a friend of his who was also an editor at Marvel who agreed to write it so that they would have issues. But Al Milgrom, who was writing it, didn't really want to write it. And so they said, well, yeah, we've got this guy that's in the PR department and marketing. He's been selling cash registers. He did okay on Spider-Man. And he's begging them, please let me do it. So they said, well, shit, can't be any worse. So they gave him a shot at it. Started a 12-year run, which was the run that started with the Grey Hulk, who then became a leg breaker in Las Vegas, went in and explained that Bruce Banner was a split personality, and the Hulk was one personality, or the Grey Hulk was one personality, and the dumb Green Hulk was another, and then they got integrated. Made fantastic story after story after story. Little name artists, Todd McFarlane, Gary Frank. These people, their career was really boosted by working on Hulk with David. And like I said, the stories were fantastic. And 12 years of great stories. At the same time that he was doing Hulk, he was also working for DC. He did, of all things, Supergirl. Well, he only did a short run on that. 80 issues. Started off, DC wanted to use Supergirl, but at the time, Kara Zor-El was dead, and John Byrne had created this other Supergirl from a creation called Matrix, artificial being. And so that's the Supergirl that Peter David had to work with. She's not Kryptonian. She has powers similar to Superman, but she's not a real person. So Matrix, or May as she became called, is starting her life trying to learn what humanity is like, trying to become a human, while trying to learn what being a superhero is. 80 issues, which ended with her becoming, or realizing that she wasn't totally artificial. There was an angel that had gone inside of her, and so she had some angelic powers also. When that ended, David started one of his longer-running creator-owned books, Fallen Angel. It started off, and it really was a direct continuation of Supergirl. The only reason Supergirl ended was because DC had decided it was time to bring Kara back, and we didn't want to have two people with the same name. That could be confusing. So he just took his storyline, a couple of little tiny tweaks, like you don't find out that she's definitely Supergirl, and all of a sudden she's the fallen angel of Bete Noir, a city that he had created, a city where evil has overtaken almost everything, where there's this one bar owner who might be Hitler, and it's this massive good versus evil. When DC canceled it, Peter David took it over to IDW and continued it, so it ran for about 40 issues or so. Okay, so we've got all of that stuff. What else has he done? What about, I think I mentioned his Star Trek run. Classic characters, but he's a huge Trekkie. And so he did the original crew doing all new adventures after the movies. He also wrote novels for them. Everything that he was doing was considered canon. That's how good it was. Paramount was like, yeah, this happened. Then there's his work on X Factor. X Factor started off as the original X-Men come back together. And it went along pretty good for a while and got kind of stale. So around issue 70 or so in the early 90s, 91 I believe, Peter David took over and threw out all the old characters and brought in a brand new group of C-listers, D-listers, maybe even E or F listers. Characters with big names like Havoc, Strong Guy, Wolvesbane, Madrox, the Multiple Man, who had appeared in like 3 issues, and made them the core of his team. He went for 19 issues in the 90s. Then he left because he was tired of the constant crossovers. And he was done with X Factor until Marvel decided to do a revival, which they tapped him for. And he did all 112 issues. So, yeah, he sticks with stuff. His run on Captain Marvel was fantastic. 60 issues. But it's not the Captain Marvel you're familiar with. I don't care which Captain Marvel you're familiar with. It wasn't Mar-Vell, the Kree soldier. It wasn't Carol Danvers taking on the name. It wasn't even any other little used character. It was the son of the original Captain Marvel, Genis Vell. Genis had actually appeared for like 12 issues in a Captain Marvel revival that just didn't make it. Then Peter David took over and ran it for 60 issues, 2 volumes, very successfully, throwing in characters like Rick Jones as a friend, also throwing in other characters from his Hulk run, and weaving everything together so that you could tell this Captain Marvel, this Hulk, this X Factor, everything's part of the same universe. He did the same thing with the stuff that he did with DC. Great writer, great stories. He's one of the reasons that I love comics.
All right. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you next time.